story again. So
tell many stories. But
we're gonna get this one on video this time.
All right. Well, here we go. Well, welcome. Good afternoon. I'm Robert, and this is a project of the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture. The building is a historic monument. It's on the U.S. Federal Register of Historic Places, built in the 1840s. A Spanish military fort, never attacked, never involved in battle. The building was basically used to house the Spanish troops and used as a prison. Never attacked by outside forces, but used to control the inside working population of Vieques, basically to control the slave population and workers in the sugar plantations. So the building, again, was a prison. There were African slaves and other sugarcane workers who rebelled at different moments, protesting for the horrific conditions in the sugar plantations. Political prisoners fighting for Puerto Rican independence against Spain in the 19th century, also jailed in the building. We also had 25 Dominican prisoners of war during the War for Restoration, a war to defend Dominican independence in relation to Spain in the 1860s. They were jailed in this building for several years in that decade, and all died between 1864 and 65 while prisoners in this building. Into the 20th century, after the U.S. Invasion of Puerto Rico, 1898, Spanish-American, Cuban, Filipino War of 1898, the building continued to be local jail into the 1940s, closed, abandoned early in the 40s, and finally restored by the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture between 1989 and 91. The building is about 90% original. The structure, as well as the outer walls, all from the same period of the mid-19th century. And upstairs, a little bit of history, art, archaeology, and that's the short story. The short story, because I'm from Boston. So every once in a while my eyes disappear. So, that's all. I have nothing else to say. All right, there's much more to say. There's a donation box on the way out. There's some literature on the table. You want the sign there, sign house in Colorado, and other places are registered as books and crafts on sale. The building also houses the Vieques Historic Archives, our Center for Historic Investigation, and a studio for Radio Vieques, our community radio station. Yeah.
Oh, you want to tell them about the Mother's Day Revolution that you were involved in?
It's funny. I haven't talked about that for such a long time. Now I'm going to do it twice in the same day. It's kind of interesting.
Why not?
The U.S. Navy bombed Vieques for decades, right? The Navy took over 2/3 of Vieques in the 40s and used it for training practice, and the eastern end was their bombing range, live impactor, and they bombed from jets, ships, tanks, bazookas, mortars, experimented with new weapon systems, invited NATO and other allies to come involved, rented Vieques out to private companies to experiment with new arms. Dropped about 1 trillion pounds of explosives here, according to University of Georgia scientist James Porter. And people protested, continuously. It was a little difficult in the 40s, 50s, even the 60s, 70s. The Cold War, you spoke out against the military, quickly branded a communist, anti-American. But there were many different moments of protest, some with greater or less, effect and support. But there was an interesting moment, Mother's Day. I don't remember the day, I don't remember the year, 1994, I want to say, 4 or 5. And I remember I was here working, and friends of ours, some of the fishermen, one of them called me up and said, look, we've got this situation here in Esperanza. A big, giant Dutch NATO ship had anchored incorrectly just off the coast in Esperanza, where fishermen go, right? And so he said, look, we're organizing a movement here to get that boat out of there. And so I quickly closed down this building and ran home and got my wet water clothes on and went down to see what the story was and jumped in one of the fishing boats with these guys, to help out and do whatever I could do. And they went out with a horn to talk to the guys in the boat. It's a gigantic boat, like 5 stories, 10 stories high, a gigantic warship. And they're, look, you guys are in the wrong place. This is not the military area. This is a civilian area. You got to get out of these. Actually, the first thing they did was turn a water hose down on us. And so the fishermen went back to shore, talked to what can we do. And the first strategy was to collect as many bottles and cans and fill them with paint, go back out there and start throwing those at the boat. Sort of paint the boat, and maybe that'll make them want to leave. So that was the first reaction. And people went out, did that. And the guys up on the boats, they had people, with long weapons, long arms. Nobody fired at us, but they were right there, and continued with the water hose, pressure hoses. And the fishermen were just very good with boats, so they got in and out of those water hoses without much problem. But then these guys up in the boat started throwing stuff down, like, nuts and bolts and a couple of wrenches here and there. And so some of the fishermen, started throwing stuff back up. I mean, they, opened up their toolboxes and started, throwing back their screwdrivers and whatever else. It was a little bit of a skirmish, and eventually the ship left. But a few days later, the FBI started visiting everybody. They came to our house, and I was home, and these 3 cars stopped in the middle of the road, blocked the road. It was a real scene, a ridiculous scene. And we knew they were coming because one of the other guys on my street, a fisherman, had been visited early in the day. He said, "Bob, they're going to come to your house shortly today." So I was home, and I remember sitting on the lawn, and my Rottweiler came down with me, and we sat down and waited. And they showed up, and they made this big scene. The guy gets out and says, "Can we come in?" I said, "No, you can't come in." And because we knew we've had a lot of dealings with the FBI and the federal police over the many decades of struggles here. And so people are pretty savvy here about their rights and what you can do and can't do. And I said, "Here's my lawyer's phone numbers, and you call them." And I said, "You guys are supposed to be protecting us from these people who are bombing Vieques, and they're doing the wrong things. You're not supposed to be here, terrorizing the community." They didn't care. I mean, they weren't very impressed with my speech. But eventually they left. Nothing happened. They had some great pictures. They showed me a really great picture of our little boat there, with throwing stuff up, and that's a really great picture. And I have a copy of it. Did ask for a copy. They didn't give it. But anyway, so that was my Mother's Day story. And then, there were many, many other moments of intense struggle here. And between 99 and 2003 was the big movement where, literally 1 million people participated. ¿Cómo están ustedes? ¿De dónde vienen? ¿De qué pueblo son ustedes? Ah, Carolina, hace Vieques. Chévere, igual, gracias por la visita. ¿Están escuchando Radio Vieques ustedes? Sí. 90.1 FM. Bueno, muy bien, ¿cómo están? Bueno, gente. Sí, desde niño. So, anyway, but there's always been a lot of intense moments here. And between 99 and 2003 was the last moment. 99, there was this incident. I mean, I'll go on forever if you guys, as long as you keep that on, I'm going to keep talking.
Keep talking.
19 April 1999, a fighter jet pilot during military maneuvers dropped 2 500-pound live bombs on the Navy's own observation post out on the eastern end. Missed the target, right, and blew up part of the OP out there. One of the guy who was killed immediately was a local guy, a Viequense, a security guard, a civilian, working for a company hired by the Navy to do security. And that death shook everybody into action like no other event had ever done in Vieques and throughout Puerto Rico. Almost immediately, we occupied the Navy's bombing range, literally. Over a couple of months, thousands of people were in there. 15 encampments, rung the eastern end of Vieques. The Navy couldn't bomb. For a year, we controlled that space. Finally, in May 4, 2000, the Navy came in, arrested about 250 of us, and took back their bombing range and started bombing again. And then we began the second phase of civil disobedience to stop the bombing. And in that phase, over 1,500 people were arrested. We had brought in a lot of, high-profile people. Bobby Kennedy Jr. was arrested with us. Reverend Al Sharpton was arrested with us. Jesse Jackson's wife, Jacqueline. Edward James Olmos, the actor, was arrested with us. Several Congress people. Lots of ministers, priests, pastors arrested with us. The bishops of every church in Puerto Rico, every single one, created the Ecumenical Council for Peace on Vieques. Union groups, student groups, women's group, environmental group, cultural groups, singers, songwriters, theater people, everybody got together. And then, the Puerto Rican diaspora, right? Millions of Puerto Ricans in New York. So, Tito Kayak, a guy from Puerto Rico, got up on the Statue of Liberty, got out onto the crown, hung a big flag that said, "Stop bombing Vieques." He spent a year in prison for that. Other people jumped into Yankee Stadium in the middle of a game with flags, "Stop the bombing." So it was a big to-do, and we finally, got this to be the biggest political issue for Puerto Rican and Latino voters in the U.S. The politicians wanted their votes because it's more money for them and their families, more stuff they can steal, and more power for them. So they eventually were forced to do the right thing so that they could have more money and more power and better mansions and stuff for their kids and grandchildren. and it worked, and it worked. And so without firing a single shot, this small community defeated the most powerful military force in the history of humanity, because people were willing to sacrifice. Women, older women, younger women, kids, university students and others, at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, went out in fishing boats, jumped in the water, got to the bombing range, to be there when day would come, light would come, and shoot up a flare, so the Navy would have to hold off their bombing, go down and arrest people. Very dangerous. I mean, I was arrested. My third arrest was in the bombing range as well, and they started there bombing away. I mean, they were lobbing these 5-inch rounds over our heads, and we were, I was kind of freaking out. But a lot of people put their lives on the line and their liberty as well. And over 1,500 people arrested. Many people spent days or weeks or months in jail. I think I did my 6 months in the federal prison in San Juan. So it was a big, a lot of people made these important sacrifices, and the Navy had no weapon against the love that people feel for Vieques, and that this really powerful spirit of solidarity that runs through the Puerto Rican nation, and that rings Vieques and Culebra as well. And the end. Actually, maybe just the beginning.
Powerful, man. Powerful. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
And these do not reflect necessarily the views and opinions of the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture.
Disclaimer.
I wish they did, but they don't.